Brian Dennehy was impossible to miss. Big frame, booming voice, but actually much more subtle and gentle than most people sometimes remember. I'm saying this with no bad intentions, but for me, he feels like someone crossed a grandma with a brick. He has these soft, warm qualities to his face, but yet he's built like an old credenza. Huge frame, imposing height, and a look that somehow makes you want to hide in the corner in shame, while also accepting a peanut butter and jam sandwich from him. It's a very odd mix. And I just love how, whenever he appears on screen, he seems to push the frame wider simply by being in it, like his shoulders alone are enough to distort the composition, and honestly they kind of are. For many VHS-era viewers, Brian Dennehy will always be Sheriff Teasle in First Blood, or perhaps the warm, charming alien leader in Cocoon, but his career stretched far beyond those roles. He was Big Tom in Tommy Boy, voiced Django in Ratatouille, and appeared in countless other memorable films and characters along the way. But his career actually started on television with a string of memorable guest appearances in shows that would go on to become part of pop culture. Before getting to those early roles, though, let's go back a little further and talk about where Brian Dennehy came from. Brian Dennehy's path to acting was anything but direct. He was born in Bridgeport, Connecticut in 1938, the son of a nurse and an Associated Press editor, and grew up mainly on Long Island. He attended Columbia University on a football scholarship, but interrupted his studies to serve 5 years in the US Marine Corps, before eventually returning and graduating with a degree in history in 1965. Acting was already calling to him, but making a living came first. Then he supported his family with all kinds of jobs, driving trucks and taxis, bartending, and even briefly working as a stockbroker, a job he absolutely hated. Interestingly, he later considered those working class years as part of his education as an actor. He never went to a traditional acting school. Instead, he used his odd working hours to catch afternoon performances and learn by watching. Eventually, his stage work around New York began opening doors, and by the mid-1970s, already approaching 40, Dennehy finally started landing television roles, followed by his first films in 1977. And it was that year, as far as I could tell, that his very first screen appearance happened, when, at almost 40 years old, he landed a guest role on Kojak.
Hi, I wanted to be a cop once.
That same year, he also appeared on MASH, and I imagine some of his own experience as a Marine probably helped him fight his way into that world. But Dennehy's face and presence were flexible enough to fit almost anywhere. He could play cops and military men, but he also turned up in huge soap operas like Dallas,
J.R. Ewing, South Fork, Braddock, Texas,
Knots Landing, and even Dynasty. He even got his own crime drama series in 1979, Big Seamus, Little Seamus, although unfortunately it only lasted 10 episodes and was actually cancelled only after 2, so most of those 10 episodes never even aired. Throughout the 1980s, he remained a familiar presence on television, appearing in shows like Cagney and Lacey.
You can't just breeze into town and bust into hotel rooms, grab some guy and haul him off to Michigan.
You're cute, honey, but you're not up on your constitutional law.
He was in the very first episode of The Wonderfully Macho Hunter,
with the IGG in God's glory message, which is...
Feel good. Take money.
and naturally Miami Vice, which gave him another great character to sink his teeth into.
Because when I preach and make you feel good, I do it for the money. Because when you send me money, I go out and I buy things with it. I buy material things.
And while he was becoming an increasingly recognizable film actor at the same time, television never really left him. He continued popping up in major shows right through the later years of his career, including a full season as Sheriff Valentine Otis on Hap and Leonard, and several appearances on The Blacklist, and many others. Despite becoming such a familiar face in movies and television, theatre was never a side project for him. It was arguably where he earned his greatest critical respect. He developed a decades-long relationship with Chicago's Goodman Theatre, particularly through his collaborations with director Robert Falls and his performances in The Plays of Eugene O'Neill. 2 Goodman productions eventually took him all the way to the Tony Awards. Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman, where Dennehy played Willie Loman, earned him the Tony for Best Actor in 1999, followed by another for O'Neill's Long Day's Journey into Night in 2003.
Thank you very much. I have to say I'm very surprised and gratified. My family's all here in the front row. How about that, huh? Pretty good.
His Willy Loman became one of his defining performances. When the production transferred to London, it also earned him the Laurence Olivier Award for Best Actor, and a film-television version later brought him a Golden Globe. Beyond that, Dennehy worked extensively at Canada's Stratford Festival, tackling Shakespeare and Samuel Beckett, and became particularly celebrated as an interpreter of O'Neill. In 2010, after decades on stage, he was inducted into the American Theatre Hall of Fame. But now let's get to the roles we all grew up with, the ones that really put Brian Dennehy in our hearts. In First Blood, he plays Sheriff Teasle, the man whose stubbornness pushes John Rambo past the breaking point. He is clearly positioned as the main antagonist, but what makes Teasle interesting is that he is not simply some cartoonishly evil cop. There are moments when he genuinely tries to calm things down, and compared to some of the officers around him, he can actually seem like the most reasonable person in the room. And if you flip the perspective and told the story entirely from the police side, First Blood could feel like a completely different movie. Suddenly, Rambo becomes this almost unstoppable force hiding in the woods, picking them off one by one. You could particularly turn the whole thing into a survival horror film. That is one of the reasons why I love First Blood so much. People sometimes remember it as just another big action movie, but there is so much more going on underneath. And Teasle is a perfect example of that. He keeps trying to hold on to his authority and convince himself that he still has control of the situation, right up until it becomes painfully clear that he has completely underestimated the man he decided to push around.
Don't push it. Don't push it, I'll give you a war you won't believe.
In Cocoon, he plays Walter, the leader of the Ontarians. It's a completely different kind of role, gentle, mysterious, warm and compassionate, and this is where that grandma and brick combination I've been talking about really proves its value.
I prefer to do that myself. They use so much chlorine. My eyes are very sensitive.
Oh, but they're lovely.
Thank you.
Dennehy had enough physical presence to feel commanding,
Jack, sit down. I don't want to sit down. Jack, sit.
but also enough softness to make Walter immediately sympathetic. It allowed him to step into roles that might seem completely outside of his usual type and still make them feel authentic and natural. In Never Cry Wolf, Dennehy plays Rosie Little, a carefree bush pilot who drops the main character into the Arctic wilderness. He brings this lazy, laid-back, but ultimately loud energy to the film. The movie is quiet, beautiful and almost meditative, and then Dennehy appears with this big, practical, larger-than-life presence. In Gorky Park, he plays Detective William Kirville, a New York cop investigating the disappearance of his brother in Moscow. He initially feels like another tough, suspicious Dennehy authority figure, but he slowly becomes an important ally to William Hurt's investigator. It's another great use of his physical presence. He feels a bit dangerous even when he's actually on your side.
What is it?
In Finders Keepers, Richard Lester's chaotic crime comedy, he is surrounded by misunderstandings, stolen money and a very odd ensemble of characters. It's not one of his most famous films, but again, it shows his range and how easily he could find himself inside such a strange little oddball movie and still feel completely at home. In Effects, he plays Lieutenant Leo McCarthy, bringing a tough but likable police vibe to this very VHS-friendly thriller. In Silverado, he plays Cobb, the corrupt sheriff of the town. It's a classic Western authority figure gone bad, but he manages to bring enough friendliness and warmth to the role that we just can't outright hate him. He's obviously on the bad side, but far from black and white. And that's the thing about Dennehy. Being an authority figure, a cop, a sheriff, an agent, just feels natural for him, like he was actually a cop in real life, and acting in film was just a side hustle next to his 9-to-5 job as a detective.
We're gonna show this world a thing or two. We're gonna show.
Oh, and he's also in Tommy Boy, where he becomes Big Tom Callahan, the beloved father figure whose absence drives both the comedy and the emotion of the film. And then there is Romeo and Juliet, where Dennehy plays Ted Montague, Romeo's father. It's a relatively small role, but a perfect fit, and with Dennehy already so comfortable with Shakespeare,
A morning hath he there been seen, with tears augmenting the fresh morning's dew.
he could step into that over-the-top style world without ever feeling out of place. By the 2000s, Dennehy wasn't appearing in quite as many films that would become major pop culture hits, but he certainly wasn't slowing down either, and there were still some great roles waiting for him. One of the most memorable was Ratatouille, where he voiced Django, Remy's father and the leader of the Rat Colony.
You feel better, Remy? Huh? You've helped a noble cause.
And I think he was a perfect fit for it. Even his voice carried that bit of intimidating but ultimately warm persona that makes you understand why everyone follows him. He also continued popping up alongside some seriously heavyweight actors. In Righteous Kill, he played the superior officer of Robert De Niro and Al Pacino, and a couple of years later he appeared as Russell Crowe's father in The Next 3 Days. These weren't huge parts, but by this point Dennehy didn't need much screen time. We already knew the kind of characters he played, and the effortless routine he brought to them helped us understand exactly who they were almost the moment they stepped into the frame.
Okay, well, get what you can out of her and then kick her loose. I hate trying to prosecute fucking lawyers.
And then, toward the very end of his career, came a pair of much quieter films. In Driveways, he plays Dell, an elderly widower who slowly develops a friendship with a young boy who moves in next door. It's a very restrained, gentle performance, almost the complete opposite of the larger-than-life Dennehy many of us grew up watching, and it ended up being one of the most acclaimed performances of his final years. Then came Son of the South, released after his passing. It was one of his final completed screen roles. You may still see additional unreleased Dennehy projects listed online, most notably Long Day Journey, which has been described as being in post-production, but considering how much time has passed, I'm not sure we will ever actually get to see them. So for all practical purposes, Driveways and The Son of South feel like the closing chapter of an absolutely huge screen career. Brian Dennehy died in 2020 at the age of 81, leaving behind one of those careers that almost feels impossible to summarize. More than 4 decades of film and television, 2 Tony Awards, 6 Emmy nominations, an Oliver Award, and a theatre career that made him one of the most respected American stage actors of his generation. And I think that grandma and brick combination really does explain a lot of his appeal. He was enormous, imposing, and could look genuinely dangerous just by standing there, but there was always something warm behind it too. That meant he could play all these widely different characters and still feel completely authentic and natural, to the point where it's hard to imagine anyone else playing them quite the same way. What I also love is that he never really stopped working.
Hi there.
Hi. He's an old cantankerous guy, as you could probably tell just from looking at me.
Hong Chow remembered that making Driveways was physically difficult for Dennehy by that point, and that he genuinely wanted to be on set every single day. That feels like a pretty fitting final image of him, already in his 80s, still showing up, still telling stories, still wanting to act. He never needed to be the star. Give him 5 minutes, a uniform, a bad attitude, or maybe just a chair to sit in, and somehow you already knew exactly who that guy was. And that, I think, is why Brian Dennehy is so easy to miss now, because for decades he simply felt like he was always going to be there. This was my mini documentary on Brian Dennehy, and I'm already working on new episodes, so if you like what you have seen, stick around, there's a lot more coming. Thanks for watching.